When thinking about the perpetrators of the most atrocious crimes committed during the Third Reich, names of men such as Henry Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, and Joseph Mengele are generally mentioned. However, there were also women who played a key role in the Nazi genocide. In this military history video, we will focus on two of the most infamous women, Irma Grese and Ilse Koch. Both actively participated in concentration camps, and their lives after the war reveal the horrors they perpetrated until the very end. Join us to discover the history of these two sadistic figures, their trials, and their final fates. If this is your first time on the channel, subscribe now so you don't miss any important content about the darkest chapters of our history. Irma Grese, the Bitch of Belsen. Irma Grese was born on October 7, 1923, in the city of Riesen, Germany. She came from a traditional and conservative family. From a young age, she showed a strong interest in Nazi ideology, which influenced her decision to join the Hitler Youth at the age of 14. This group, designed to indoctrinate German youth in Nazi values, was the first step in her trajectory toward violence and brutality. In 1942, at only 18 years old, Irma was admitted as a guard in the Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she was part of the female SS Corps. Her family life was tumultuous. Her father, a declared anti-Nazi, threw her out of the house after learning of her commitment to the regime. In an act of revenge, Irma reported her father, who was arrested for his anti-regime views. Her career took a drastic turn when she was transferred to Auschwitz in 1943. In this place, horror reached new levels. Grese quickly ascended to supervisor and stood out for her brutality. She was in charge of overseeing the prisoners, many of whom were Jewish, and she became known for her sadistic behavior. Survivor testimonies reveal that Irma delighted in humiliating and torturing the prisoners, whipping them with a braided leather lash and sometimes allowing her dogs to attack the detainees. One survivor, Esther, stated in her testimony, "Grese was not just a guard, she was a monster. The way she enjoyed inflicting pain was terrifying. It was as if suffering gave her pleasure." These words encapsulate the essence of Grese's brutality. As the war progressed, the Auschwitz concentration camp became a place of mass extermination. Grese was a witness and participant in the atrocities carried out there, including the selection of prisoners for the gas chambers. She was responsible for deciding who would live and who would die, a power that further corrupted her. After the evacuation of Auschwitz, Irma was transferred to the Bergen-Belsen camp, where she continued her reign of terror. There, her role became even more infamous, as the conditions of the camp were horrendous and the arrival of Allied troops was imminent. British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen in April 1945, finding a camp full of corpses and malnourished survivors. Irma was captured along with other Nazi staff. The Bergen-Belsen trial, held between September and December 1945, was one of the most significant of the post-war period. Dozens of witnesses, mostly survivors of the camps, gave chilling testimonies about Grese's cruelty. She was charged with murders, tortures, and sexual abuses. Grese's case became particularly media-focused, generating interest from both the public and the media. One of the most shocking accusations was that Grese delighted in beating young and beautiful prisoners, which led many to speculate about her psychology. It was believed that her own insecurity about her physical appearance drove her to humiliate and torture the prisoners. In her statement, she admitted to having beaten prisoners but argued that she did so for justified reasons. However, she never showed remorse for her actions. On December 13, 1945, at the age of 22, Irma Grese was executed for war crimes. She became the youngest person to be sentenced to death under British law in the 20th century. Until the very end, she maintained a defiant attitude. During her execution, she violently refused to have a hood placed on her, leading to a confrontation with the British executioner Albert Pierrepoint. Her last words were, "Snell, quickly," demanding that her death be immediate. The execution did not go as planned, and it is believed that she died from strangulation due to a misplacement of the rope. Ilse Koch, the Witch of Buchenwald. Ilse Koch, born on September 22, 1906, in Dresden, Germany, became a feared figure in the realm of concentration camps. She joined the National Socialist Party in 1932, where she met her future husband, Karl Otto Koch, who became an SS officer with a distinguished career. Together, they ruled the Buchenwald concentration camp, a place where human suffering became their daily routine. Ilse, initially assigned to administrative tasks, soon began to show her sadistic tendencies. Her behavior became increasingly violent as she took pleasure in watching prisoners being tortured and executed. Her reputation as the Witch of Buchenwald preceded her. Her rage and sadism were well known. She specialized in prisoners with tattoos, who were subjected to a horrific fate. Ilse ordered that they be brought to her, and after their execution, she made sure their skin was removed to make lamps and trophies that decorated her house. The testimony of a prisoner, Friedrich, reveals the extent of the horror experienced in Buchenwald. The terror was palpable, and Koch was the embodiment of evil. She smiled while our lives faded away. It was an indescribable experience. This type of experience was repeated in testimonies from numerous survivors, who described Ilse as a cruel, ruthless woman with no remorse. The Koch marriage was a deadly combination of sadism and corruption. Karl Otto Koch was arrested for embezzling funds allocated to the Nazi regime, and after an internal investigation, he was sentenced to death. During this time, Ilse continued to enjoy her position of power, mocking the prisoners and showing her disdain for them. After the war, Ilse was arrested and tried for crimes against humanity. The first sentence was life imprisonment, but her sentence was reduced to a shorter term, which caused public outrage. During her trial, Ilse attempted to present herself as a victim of the regime, claiming she was just following orders, but many were not fooled by her defense. She was sentenced in 1949 to a prison sentence but was released in 1951. Ilse Koch moved to West Germany after her release, where she lived in relative obscurity. Despite her attempts to reintegrate into society, the shadow of her crimes never left her. In 1967, under pressure from the media and the resurgence of interest in her case, Ilse Koch was arrested again, this time for drug possession. Her life ended in a German prison, where she hanged herself in her cell in 1967 at the age of 60. Irma Grese and Ilse Koch embody the horror and cruelty of the Third Reich, women who, far from being mere passive participants, stood out for their abyss of sadism and brutality. Both figures are remembered today not only for their atrocious crimes but as symbols of the worst of human nature in times of war. Their stories remind us of the importance of historical memory and the need to never forget the horrors of the past to prevent them from repeating in the future. If you've made it this far and have learned something new from our stories, subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Together, we can uncover and remember the truths that history often tries to hide.